Not one missile made it through the defense layer, because there was no defense layer left. On the night of August 5, 2026, 17 people were killed across Kyiv and its surrounding region as Russia launched one of its deadliest barrages of the year, and Ukraine's Air Force failed to intercept a single incoming missile. The question hanging over the capital right now is whether this is the new normal or the beginning of something far worse. Ukraine's Air Force reported that Russia launched 115 drones and 28 missiles, 24 ballistic missiles and 4 anti-ship missiles into the country overnight. None of the missiles were shot down, the Air Force said, citing preliminary data, reporting missile and drone impacts across 26 locations. Drones, at least, were partially stopped. But the weapons that matter most, the ones that arrive without warning at hypersonic speed, flew completely uncontested. Russian missile and drone strikes on Kyiv and the surrounding region killed 17 people and wounded 44 others overnight into Wednesday, Zelensky said. The barrage, which lasted about 2 hours, was the latest in a series of large-scale Russian missile strikes that have become almost routine this summer. Routine. That word should land hard. A capital city of nearly 3 million people is now being hit so frequently that the phrase almost routine is how international correspondents choose to describe it. The casualties clustered outside the city rather than inside it. 9 people were killed in Brovary district, 4 in Bucha district, and 1 in Fastiv. The heaviest single loss came in the village of Kvitneve, where 8 were killed and 3 wounded at a railway station, according to Ukrainian outlet UNN. Think about that for a moment. 8 people dead at a train platform. The people at Kvitneve station did not manage to board the last train, which was delayed, and they remained on the platform. They were waiting. They were not soldiers, not military targets, not near anything resembling a weapons depot. They were waiting for a late train, and the missiles arrived first. Large fires burned through logistics and warehouse complexes in Brovary and in the villages of Velika Demerka, Kvitneve, and Paramoha, with emergency crews working 4 sites in Brovary district alone. So how did Russia put 28 missiles into the Kyiv region without a single one being stopped? The answer isn't in tonight's attack. It's in a war that's being fought on the other side of the world, and it's the reason this story is bigger than one night's death toll. Layer by layer, from the Patriot battery that can no longer fire to the American stockpile number that explains why, we're going to pull this apart. And at the center of it sits one production figure that reframes the entire Western Alliance's ability to defend any city, anywhere. Moscow is exploiting Ukraine's critical shortage of interceptors for the United States-made Patriot systems, the sole air defense weapon in its arsenal able to shoot down ballistic missiles. That's the mechanism in plain language. The Patriot system is not broken, it's not been destroyed, it's not been captured. It's simply empty. Zelensky said after a Russian aerial attack the previous Friday night that air defenses shot down only 1 ballistic missile, and only because there are no missiles for the Patriots. Supplies of defensive missiles for Ukraine in the first half of this year fell to 1/3 of the 2025 level, Zelensky said. 1/3. In less than 6 months, the pipeline that was keeping Kyiv alive shrank by 2/3. That's not a gradual decline, that's a collapse in delivery. And to understand why it happened, you have to go back to February 28th of this year. Since the United States-Iran war began in February, Patriot missiles intended for Ukraine have been redirected to the United States military and American allies in the Gulf. That single decision, or rather, that procurement discretion decisions made quietly in Washington, is the direct cause of what happened at that train platform in Kvitneve. When the Iran war intensified earlier in 2026, United States and partner forces reportedly expended hundreds of terminal high-altitude area defense interceptors and more than 800 Patriot interceptors in the conflict's opening days alone, against a Lockheed production base delivering roughly 620 PAC-3 MSE rounds a year. Read that again slowly. 620 rounds a year, a volume that some trackers noted was less than a single day's expenditure during the war's opening week. The math is devastating. The Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington said in July that the United States had more than 2,300 Patriots before President Trump launched the Iran war on February 28th. Today, The number is around 800. 1,500 interceptors consumed, a production line that replaces 600 a year. And Ukraine's portion of what's left is essentially zero. In June, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth called news reports about a shortage of Patriot missiles a manufactured story. However, 2 months earlier, Hegseth acknowledged that replenishing missile stockpiles could take months and years. Months and years. 17 people died last night. The gap between those two facts is where the real politics of this war lives. Experts told Al Jazeera that Russian President Vladimir Putin is sure to exploit the shortage, using his ballistic missiles, weapons he once declared were indestructible, against a Kyiv that no longer has the means to stop them. Putin said his missiles were indestructible. He was wrong when he said it. He's closer to right tonight. Not because of anything Russia built, but because of what the West ran out of on the other side of a different war. Now, here's where this gets darker, and it's the question that should be keeping every Western defense planner awake. If the Patriot crisis is this severe over Ukraine, what does it mean for every other Patriot customer in the world right now? The Iranian war has necessitated the withdrawal of terminal high-altitude area defense and Patriot assets from South Korea and the Indo-Pacific. Roughly 90 retired Israeli PAC-2 GEM-T interceptors were subsequently transferred to Ukraine through the Pentagon, and demand from the Iran conflict reportedly forced Washington to pause Patriot deliveries to Kyiv in the first place. So Ukraine got 90 aging interceptors as a band-aid, while the active stockpile bled out. 90 rounds against the 24 ballistic missiles that flew last night alone. And if you want to track where this story is going, subscribe now, because the interceptor math is about to get even tighter, and what Russia does with that window in the coming weeks is the single most important military question of this war. Kyiv has faced missile attacks every 3 to 4 days in recent weeks, as Russia intensifies its air campaign. That cadence matters enormously. If Ukraine can't stop a single ballistic missile today, and Russia is hitting the capital roughly twice a week, then every 3 to 4 days is another night like last night. Every 3 to 4 days is another 17 people or more. The Russian Defense Ministry offered its own framing of last night's strike. Moscow said in a statement posted to Telegram that its massive strike targeted what it called transport, logistics, and distribution centers in the city of Kyiv and the Kyiv region. The ministry said that storage and distribution facilities for drone components and electronic warfare systems were among the targets struck, as were 3 cargo ships. That's Moscow's legal cover: dual-use goods, military supply chains, legitimate military targets. But the strikes hit a brewery, a mail sorting office, a hardware store warehouse, a railway platform full of waiting passengers. Moscow's attack overnight into Wednesday seemed to offer a riposte to recent Ukrainian strikes on Wildberries, Russia's equivalent of Amazon, which have brought the war closer to home for ordinary Russians by disrupting their daily lives and livelihoods. That context matters for understanding the escalatory logic at play. Ukraine hits Russian logistics, Russia hits Ukrainian logistics. Except Russia is now doing it unopposed, from the sky, with weapons that fly too fast to catch. Zelensky's response Wednesday was not just grief. It was a direct indictment of the alliance. He confirmed in a post on social media that the main target of the attack was the warehouses of civilian enterprises, with strikes also hitting infrastructure and a railway station. He called for new steps from the Group of Seven, from the European Union, and from everyone who supports the protection of life. He wrote that a significant portion of Russian ballistic missile production is not currently under sanctions, and that this needs to change, adding that new steps are needed from the Group of Seven, from the European Union, from everyone who supports the protection of life. That's a 2-track ask: more interceptors, but also a sanctions net broad enough to strangle Russia's ability to keep building these weapons. Neither is quick, neither is easy, and the missiles keep coming either way. A note of balance, because the picture isn't entirely without any Ukrainian agency. Ukraine's drone campaign against Russia has remained active. The Russian Defense Ministry said its forces downed 475 Ukrainian drones overnight over 16 Russian regions, as well as in illegally annexed Crimea and the waters of the Sea of Azov and the Black Sea. That number, if accurate, means Ukraine's drone factories are producing at extraordinary volume. And Zelensky has pleaded with other countries to send more ammunition, and failing that, he wants to manufacture Patriot ammunition inside Ukraine, or win permission to use Starlink satellite communications to guide strikes inside Russia. Yet none of that changes the core arithmetic of what happened last night. Drones are survivable. They're slower, trackable, and cheaper to stop. The Russians and the Iranians have been firing ballistic missiles in numbers that outpace the rate at which Patriot interceptors are being produced. That's the industrial fact underneath everything else. It doesn't matter how well Ukraine's air defense crews are trained, how sophisticated their radar systems are, or how strategically placed the Patriot batteries are. You can't fire an interceptor you don't have, and right now, they don't have them. Poland's own PAC-3 MSE deliveries under the Wisla program, worth more than $9 billion, are scheduled for 2027 through 2029, downstream of the same production constraints that have left Ukraine exposed today. The shortage isn't a Kyiv problem or a Ukraine problem. It's a Western industrial problem, playing out in real time over a city of nearly 3 million civilians. There's one more dimension here that the casualty numbers alone don't capture. The deadly assault underlines the worsening danger for urban civilians far from the front lines, as Ukraine grapples with perilously low stocks of missile interceptors. Far from the front lines. The people killed at that train station in Kvitneve were not near the fighting. Brovary, Bucha, Fastiv. These are suburbs, satellite towns, communities where people go about their lives with the distant understanding that the war is somewhere else. That understanding is now gone. Damage was recorded at more than 7 locations across Kyiv city itself, including the Holosivsky, Obolonsky, Dizhniansky, and Sviatoshinsky districts, according to the Kyiv City Military Administration. Mayor Vitaly Klitschko said 2 people had been rescued from beneath the rubble of a collapsed warehouse in the Holosivsky district. Klitschko also said a fire broke out in a 20-story residential building, with the cause likely a missile strike. A residential high-rise on fire. That's not logistics infrastructure, that's a home. Russia dropped over 8,300 glide bombs on Ukraine in July alone, a record figure since the full-scale invasion began. Ballistic missiles over Kyiv, glide bombs on the front lines, drones everywhere in between. The Russian air campaign in the summer of 2026 has reached a scale and pace that the first years of the war never matched, precisely because Moscow has correctly calculated that the defensive ceiling has dropped. Russia has increased its ballistic missile attacks on Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities as its battlefield advances have slowed this year. That's the strategic logic. When you can't break the front line, you break the city. When the city can't shoot back at your missiles, you push harder. The interceptor gap doesn't just cause civilian casualties, it changes Russia's military calculus entirely, removing the cost from a tactic that Moscow had previously found expensive and risky. The markers to watch from here are specific. First, whether any new Patriot interceptor deliveries are confirmed to Ukraine in the coming weeks. Not promised, not announced, but confirmed as physically arrived. Second, whether Russia's strike cadence changes. If the interval drops below 3 days, it signals Moscow has concluded the window is open enough to push for maximum strategic effect before any resupply arrives. Third, watch the Brovary district again. The infrastructure hit there last night suggests Russia is deliberately targeting the logistics network that supports Kyiv's civilian and military supply chain, not just firing indiscriminately. 17 dead on August 5, 2026. Not one missile stopped. A production line building 600 interceptors a year to replace 1,500 already spent in someone else's war. The sky over Kyiv is open, and everyone involved knows it. Is what we're watching the permanent new ceiling of Ukraine's air defense? Or is the West still capable of making a decision fast enough to close the gap before the next barrage lands? Leave your answer in the comments, and if you want to follow how this plays out, subscribe, because the interceptor numbers, the G7 response, and Russia's next move are all moving fast.